The 4% rule. I mean, 35 is not old. Respect to all of the people watching this video. 35 is not old, but in the way of financial rules, a rule that is 35 years old, perhaps we shouldn't be letting it hold law over our financial decisions. Am I right? Am I wrong?
I was still on AOL in 95. When this thing came around, I was using AOL. Instant Messenger.
We all were.
AIM,
AOL was the thing in the 90s.
Chat rooms. Yeah. 4 hours of internet a month. And 28 kilobytes per second.
The dial-up sound.
Yeah.
The connection. Sometimes it would hang up on you. That was sad when it would hang up on you.
There's a great episode of Friends where Chandler gets a new laptop from his work and he starts describing the specs behind it. And it's awful. And he's like bragging,
and it was so
512 megabytes of memory transferring at 28.8 kilobytes per second.
It's like, that's not good. But then, big deal. Well, it is 2025. If you are close to retirement, you probably need to be rethinking the 4% rule. This is Mike Douglas, certified financial planner, a.k.a. Michigan's Retirement Coach. Our website is michigansretirementcoach.com. Or you can click on the links posted in the show notes. I'm Heather Branch, here to ask Mike about things that I see on the internet or read or hear in the news, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of good information out there, but I always say is like, take the information, take the idea, and then narrow it down to your situation, right? Like that's the idea of everything you do. There's lots of great information, but how does it apply to you?
Yeah.
So the 4% rule, again, it was created by a man named William Benjamin. He created it in the 1990s, a decade when the markets were on fire, just people making money everywhere. The idea was the market averages 9%. If you withdraw 4% each year in retirement, you'll never run out of money. So he's got a new book out now, A Richer Retirement. And Benjamin even suggests in this book, increasing your exposure to stocks while you're in retirement. This is what he said on Yahoo Finance.
Yeah, there are three choices: reduce stocks, maintain them, or increase them. And of the three, the worst is to decrease your stocks. It's the one thing you don't want to do. Fortunately, there's a plateau between about 47% stocks, about 75% stock. If you stay in that range and the rest in bonds and cash, you'll end up with about the same withdrawal rate, about 4.7% or whatever you choose.
So what he just said, the worst thing you can do is decrease your market risk in retirement, and which seems to go against, at least a lot of what you say as far as what folks need to be doing in their retirement. Mike, is there a problem here with what he's saying in this line of thinking?
So this is where we start to see a weird not splitting, but just a divergence between some thought of academic financial research versus client experience and what happens at a conference room table when you sit with a retiree who is going through it, preparing for it. They're deathly afraid of retirement without a paycheck.
Yeah.
And they say, all right, well, what happens if the market's good? Well, if the market's good and you're taking 4%, the market drives up your account, you get 4%. What happens if the market's bad? Well, the market drives down your accounts, but it'll come back. It averages 9% over the years. And that's great. But when you have a plan like that, you are really using the law of averages and large numbers, and you're using long-term statistics to make short-term decisions. The 9% average is a 100-year number. But really, retirees don't care about the 100-year number. They care about the next 15 to 20 years. And that's pretty much it. So there are these market cycles that we go through that can really negatively or positively impact your portfolios in retirement. If you retire when the market's going, if you had retired in 2009 or 10, the market's at a bottom, you build a retirement plan using the rule of 4%. I get 4%. Well, then for the next basically 15 years, the market has over time gone up. And so you go, okay, my income keeps going up and up. But in this, he's not discussing the way people feel or the way people process the information during 2022 when stocks and bonds both fell 20% and the NASDAQ dropped 30%. Mm-hmm. When 2020, the fastest 33% crash in history. Again, black swan event, recovered back. It did work out, but the way people feel matters in certain time frames. You shouldn't build your plans on feelings ever, but it does matter when you sit at a conference table. And when you look at 2018, two 10% crashes and a 20% crash, the great financial crisis, 53% drop over 18 months. The dot-com bubble burst, 43% over 3 years. There's been a lot of times where the market tanks. And if you retire at the wrong time, the market's tanking, you're tanking. And because you increased or kept your stock position the same as what it was, it can really hurt. I had a guy who retired from Ford, and he retired in 1999. And 1999, 2000 were good. And then in 2001, 2, and 3, the market dropped 3 straight years, and he was using the rule of 4%. And so if it was a 1-year crash and recovery, no big deal. 2-year crash and recovery, it stinks, but it's not. 3-year crash, the market loses 43%, and he's pulling out 4% per year. He was down around 50% coming out of the first 5 years of retirement. And that's tough. And through that all, the advisor just keeps saying, just keep hanging on. You're going to be okay.
He was working with an advisor at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And the guy's using the rule of 4% because it was new back then. The rule of 4% was not even 10 years old.
So the rule of 4% was new. Also, the 1990s were a great decade for the market. There's no reason to assume it's almost like that was the time that taught us a lot of lessons that have brought us to where we are now in 2025.
Oh, yeah. And so they drop all this money, loses value. And then from 2004, 5, 6, and half of 7, it starts recovering, never gets all the way back. And then from October of 07 to March of 09, the market drops 53%. And he loses a bunch of money again. And so for him, because of not the fact that he retired with $1.8 million. He had a lot of money, but he retired, and $1.8 million back in 99 is a lot of money. It's not $1.8 million today. It's a lot more money.
Yeah.
And he retired with what should have been plenty, but because of the bad market cycle, he went through it. This is what's called sequence of returns risk. It's about the timeline of when you retire and when you start withdrawing money from your accounts versus the timing or market cycles that we go through. We know that the market's going to drop 20% every 3 years or so. We know that the market's going to go through a 40% correction, typically every 5 to 7 years. What happens if those things happen kind of back to back? And you go through that. What happens if we go through a long period like 2009 through 2018, where we never really had a negative year in the market? Like 2015 was negative, I think 0.67%. 2018, the market's negative 6%. But through all that, the market just keeps running up. And then we have a 2022 correction where stocks and bonds fall simultaneously. So there's a lot of what ifs. So when you retire in one of those cycles would help determine the success of your plan.
Right.
So I don't disagree with what the rule says, which is the market earns 9%. So if you take out 4%, you will average a 5% positive arbitrage and you keep growing your accounts. That's true.
Right. But it's based on an average.
Yeah. And so the problem is the market drops 20%. So I have $1 million and I follow this advice, and I'm not going to decrease my stock exposure. I'm going to increase my stock exposure to make sure I get that 9%. So now I retire and I go to a 70-30 portfolio or 80-20 portfolio. 80% of my money's in stocks, 20% is in bonds because I want to increase that position, or 60-40, whatever number. And it's funny, just 2 years ago in 2020, or 3 years ago now, in 2022, all we heard was the death of the 60-40 portfolio because bonds and stocks both fell.
Right.
So you choose a 60-40 or 70-30 portfolio, 70% of your money experiences a major loss. And you're taking 4% out. So I have $1 million and I lose 200,000 because the market drops 25 to 30%. I lose 200,000, but remember at the start of the year I said I'm taking out 4% of that, so I'm taking out $40,000.
Yep.
I'm down $240,000. Now there's some wiggle in this math a little bit because you're taking it out through the course of the year, but still down about $240,000. Now the market has to recover back from 760,000 back to $1 million to get me even. So it's not a 25% recovery it needs about a 31% recovery. And it recovers me back to where I was. Now, what happens if there's 2 bad years in the market and I lose 20% one year, 10% the next year? Well, really, I'm down to 760, and then I lose 10%, another $76,000, and then I'm going down another 4%. So all of a sudden, I'm at 650, 630. So you can see how you're compounding losses on losses. I lose and I take, then I lose, then I take. The other side of this coin is, and we get comments all the time on these type of things that say, but did you know? Yeah, I know this. The other side of the coin is you have $1 million. The market makes 20%. You make 16% or 12% because you're 70% equities. So you go up to 1.2 or $1.12 million and you take out some money, and then it goes up again and you get to take out more. So there's a really beautiful kind of sexy side to this curve.
Sure.
And there's the ugly side. And just to flat out say the market average is 9%, the math works out. I don't disagree with everything he's saying, except for I've sat with that client who lost money almost all of the 2000s. And from 1999, when he had 1.8 million, to 2009 at the bottom of the crash when he's sitting at $600,000 10 years into retirement. I know what the rules say, but I know what he lived.
Yep.
And what he lived is more powerful to me than what the rules say.
Right.
So when we sat down with him and he had to go back to basically managing his own portfolios, he fires his advisor, he manages his own portfolios. He works like a dog. He gets up early in the morning, stays at the computer all day long, researches, studies, and trades, gets himself back up to $2.2 million by 2018.
Which is amazing. Yeah.
I was like, are you looking to be hired? Because I could use some work like that. Right. But he was very aggressive. And when we sat down in 2018, he said, I'm tired.
Sure.
And I'm ready to re-retire almost 20 years later. And as we sat through it and
at this
walked
point,
through the
he was,
process,
because I think you told me before he retired early, so he retired in his 50s. So now he's in his mid 70s.
Yeah.
Worn out.
Yeah.
Emotionally.
Just beat up.
Yeah.
Had postponed travel, had postponed fun.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't afford to leave. And he had gotten into this scarcity mindset where he just was like deathly afraid of missing out or trying to catch up to where he could have been. Because there's always the math you can run. You know, if I had 1.8 million and I had just put it in the bank, I could have gotten this. But horses were out of the barn. We had to do some recovery work. So he got himself back to 2.2 million. And then we went through the process of managing, taxes, estate planning, investment planning, and income, risk, all these things that go into it.
Yeah.
And as we went through and navigated it, we finally got to a point where he said, okay, I'm ready to retire. He hired us on to be his financial advisor in his money management firm and handle all that stuff for him. So when we went through and he signed the paperwork, his wife audibly just had like a relief.
Yeah.
And 2 months later, I called to check in on him. So how you guys doing? Well, he still checks the accounts all the time, but he's not managing it, which is good.
Yeah.
More importantly, we're planning our trip to the Canadian Rockies. Now, I didn't know, again, just my lack of knowledge of Canada. I didn't know there was a Canadian Rockies.
Yeah.
But I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, there's this train ride you can take through the Canadian Rockies and you get to see all this beautiful stuff. And we've been planning this trip forever. We were supposed to take it early on in our retirement, but here we are 20 years later, and we're finally planning and taking that trip. I know what the rule says.
Yeah.
I know how it works on a spreadsheet and in a vacuum and behind computer screens. But when I'm sitting with someone and they are planning their life and their retirement and their dreams, and they just happen to get caught in the wrong end of a market cycle, you can't tell me that there's not some common sense into maybe de-risking some positions for a season to make sure they live out their life the right way.
Right.
I think rules are good. It gives us parameters to start planning from. But I wouldn't use the same internet speeds I got in 1995. I wouldn't get in a plane that was built in 1995. I want top of the line premium new stuff. Why? Because this is my life. This is my enjoyment. This is everything. Just know that rules are there for suggestion when it comes to this stuff.
It's a starting point, like you said. Yeah.
You're a person, you're a family with specific goals, desires, risk tolerances, capacities, all of that. Don't allow old rules to determine your new retirement.
Yeah.
Know that it's 2025 and your life is yours.
MichigansRetirementCoach.com is the website to go to start a conversation one-on-one about your plan with Mike and his team. We also have links posted in the show notes. All right, as we wrap up, thinking about then somebody who's watching this, hearing the story, taking the moral of it. I don't want to be in a situation where I retire this year and then we go on another lost decade, which is what happened in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
So what does somebody then need to do? How do we prevent this from happening? What are some action items, questions we need to be asking in order to protect ourselves?
Well, whenever you start retirement planning, it needs to come from the basis. The very foundation is income. Without income, you're not retired. You got to go back to work.
Okay.
So figure out with your Social Securities, your pension, whatever you have, what is your net after-tax income, but yet how much do you need? And then figure out that gap, and then figure out the best solution for how to deal with that in as low of a risk way as possible. Now, again, this flies in the face of what he was just saying, but it's because I've sat in these seats before.
Yeah.
I think that now some people are very comfortable with risk. Well, then you should be allowed to risk up your portfolio.
Yeah.
Some people just want to snowbird and get out of the Michigan winters, and that's all they care about. And they don't need high returns. They just want low volatility. Because if you look at your statement on a month-to-month basis, and the months that there's a loss hurt you way more than the joy you get out of the gains, that tells us something. On the other hand, if you go through a loss in your portfolios and you say, yeah, well, this is just a buying opportunity, that also tells us something about who you are. So I think the biggest thing is to start sitting down with someone who understands this, who can walk you through the intricacies of sequence of returns risk, the intricacies of taxes and estate planning, the intricacies of investment planning for retirees specific to your family, and understand that, Heather, your family is different than my family. And our needs in life, desires in life, what fulfills us in life will always be different because we're all different people. To say 4%, and that's the end of the conversation, I just don't think that's appropriate. So if people want to have that conversation or start understanding it, we've got the notes below. You can go to michigansretirementcoach.com, click on the link and grab a time and we'll talk, or send us a message, and we'll just hear what you want life to look like and see where you sit and see if there's anything we can give you advice along the way to make it yours and let retirement happen for you, not to you.
I think that's such an accurate point you were making. Is I wouldn't settle for internet speeds from 1995. Like, if nothing, like, consider that. Why are you still applying financial rules from 1995 to your retirement? You would not think about just your cell phone. Some people didn't even have cell phones in 1995.
No.
Would you be good with the cell phone? Remember that big Zach Morris Bricks phone? Is that what you're walking around with in 2025? Of course not. Why are you walking around with 1995 rules on your financial and retirement plan setup? You can do better. Let's get to work helping you understand. Again, it's michigansretirementcoach.com, or just click on the links we got posted in the show notes.